Have you ever heard stories of a world long ago? A world filled with mystery, magic, and incredible secrets. I want to take you on a journey back in time to explore the connections between ancient peoples. We often think of old civilizations as separate, living in their own small worlds. But what if they were all part of one enormous interconnected story? Let's begin with some of the most mysterious builders of all. In the beautiful islands of Hawaii, people tell tales of the Menehune. They were said to be a small but very strong people who worked only at night. They built amazing things like temples, fish ponds, and roads, all in a single evening. The stories say they were masters of engineering, and their work can still be seen today, a testament to their incredible skill. The Menehune are not alone in the world's collection of mysterious builders. All across the globe, from Ireland to Korea, we find strange and wonderful stone structures called dolmens. These are like giant stone tables made from massive rocks that weigh many tons. How did ancient people, without our modern machines, lift these heavy stones? Some say it was giants, while others believe it was a forgotten kind of magic or technology. When you look at the Menehune's work in Hawaii and then at the dolmens in Europe or Asia, you start to see a fascinating similarity. Both were built with immense stones, put together with a skill that baffles us even now. It makes one wonder if these builders shared a common knowledge, a secret way of working with stone that has since been lost to time. This idea of a shared past is so wonderfully intriguing. Could the legends of small magical builders like the Menehune be a memory of a real group of people? Perhaps they were a tribe of expert stonemasons who traveled the world sharing their skills. Or maybe different cultures facing similar challenges simply came up with similar solutions for building. The truth is hidden in the mists of time, but the questions are what make it so exciting. Looking at these ancient stones, you can almost feel the presence of the people who put them there. You can sense their hard work, their beliefs, and their connection to the land, a connection that feels both ancient and deeply familiar. Thinking about these builders opens up a whole world of possibilities. It suggests that our ancient ancestors were not isolated. They might have been communicating, trading, and traveling far more than we ever imagined. The stones they left behind are like pieces of a giant puzzle. Each structure, whether it's a Hawaiian temple or a European dolmen, is a clue. It tells us that these people were intelligent, organized, and had a deep understanding of their world. As we continue our journey, we will see how these threads of connection weave through other great mysteries, linking lost continents, famous kings, and sacred mountains into one grand, beautiful tapestry of human history. One of the most famous stories of a lost world is the tale of Atlantis. The Greek philosopher Plato told us about this incredible island kingdom. He said it was a paradise, a land of great wealth, advanced technology, and powerful rulers. The people of Atlantis were said to have come from the sea god Poseidon himself. They built a magnificent city with concentric rings of land and water, and a grand temple covered in precious metals. For a long time, they were noble and wise. But as the years passed, greed and ambition began to corrupt them. They wanted to conquer the world, and their pride angered the gods. It's a story we've heard many times, a warning about the dangers of losing your way. According to the legend, the gods decided to punish the Atlanteans for their hubris. In a single, terrible day and night, there were violent earthquakes and devastating floods. The entire island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves, vanishing forever and taking all its wonders with it. Whether Atlantis was a real place or just a story to teach a lesson, we may never know for sure. But the idea of a great civilization being wiped out has captured our imaginations for centuries. It makes us think about what we might have lost: knowledge, art, and a whole chapter of human history, now buried deep under the ocean. The fall of Atlantis represents the ultimate loss, a reminder that even the greatest powers can disappear. After the supposed fall of Atlantis, the world needed a new center of power and knowledge. Many ancient stories suggest that some survivors from Atlantis escaped the disaster. They traveled to different parts of the world, carrying their wisdom with them. One place that rose to prominence around this time was the magnificent kingdom of Egypt. Suddenly, along the banks of the Nile, an incredible civilization appeared. The Egyptians built pyramids with mathematical precision, developed a complex system of writing, and had a deep understanding of astronomy. Could this sudden burst of knowledge have been influenced by refugees from a lost world like Atlantis? It's a tantalizing thought. The rise of Egypt marked a new era. It became a beacon of learning and culture in the ancient world. People from all over came to Egypt to trade, to learn, and to share ideas. The Great Library of Alexandria, built much later, would become a symbol of this collection of global knowledge. Egypt's story is not just about pyramids and pharaohs. It's about a place that became a melting pot of cultures. It stood as a bridge between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The legacy of Atlantis might be a myth, but the rise of Egypt was very real. It became the new heart of the ancient world, pumping knowledge and culture through the veins of civilization, much like the Nile itself brought life to the desert. Long before the age of planes and trains, the ancient world was connected by a vast network of sea and land routes. It was like a giant spider's web, with threads of trade and travel stretching across continents. The seas, especially the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, were not barriers, they were highways. Brave sailors in simple wooden ships navigated by the stars, carrying precious goods from one port to another. Imagine a ship setting sail from the mysterious land of Punt, which some believe was in modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. It would be laden with incense, ebony and gold, destined for the grand temples and palaces of Egypt. This trade was vital, connecting the heart of Africa with the powerful Egyptian kingdom. These trade routes didn't stop in Egypt. They extended much further, creating a truly global marketplace for the time. Goods from India, like spices, cotton, and exotic jewels, would travel across the Arabian Sea. They would then be carried overland or through the Red Sea to reach the bustling markets of the Mediterranean. From there, they could find their way to the powerful city-states of Greece, the legendary walls of Troy in modern-day Turkey, and beyond. This exchange was not just about goods, it was an exchange of ideas, stories, and cultures. A Greek merchant might hear a story from an Indian sailor, a new way of thinking that he would then take back home with him. The city of Troy, made famous by Homer's epic poem The Iliad, was a perfect example of such a crossroads. It was strategically located where Europe and Asia meet, controlling the vital trade route between the Black Sea and the Aegean. This made Troy incredibly wealthy and powerful, but it also made it a target. The Trojan War, if it happened as the stories say, was likely fought not just over a beautiful queen, but over control of these lucrative trade routes. The cities and kingdoms of this era, including those in Greece and Ethiopia, a region that ancient Greeks associated with Africa south of Egypt, were all part of this interconnected world. Their fates were tied together by the ebb and flow of trade. This constant movement of people and products created a vibrant mix of cultures. An artisan in Greece might learn a new pottery technique from an Egyptian visitor. A ruler in Turkey might adopt a style of dress he saw on a trader from Ethiopia. This sharing made the ancient world a much richer and more diverse place. It shows us that globalization is not a new idea. Our ancestors were just as curious and eager to connect with others as we are today. They understood that prosperity and knowledge came from looking beyond their own borders and embracing the wider world, a lesson that is still just as important for us to remember in our own time. History is often told through the stories of its great leaders, and the ancient world was full of kings whose legends have echoed through the ages. These figures were more than just rulers, they were symbols of their people and the connections between their cultures. Take for example King Midas of Phrygia, in what is now modern-day Turkey. We all know the story of his golden touch, a gift that turned into a curse. But Midas was a real king, and his kingdom was a cultural bridge. Phrygia had strong ties to the east, but also to the Greeks in the west. The story of Midas itself is a Greek legend about a non-Greek king, which shows just how closely these cultures were intertwined in their storytelling and their history. Another fascinating figure appears under different names in different cultures, showing how stories traveled and changed. The Greeks told of a king called Nanacus, who was so old he was said to have ruled before a great flood. After his death, his people wept so much that their tears caused the flood that destroyed them. This sounds very similar to the story of Noah from the Hebrew Bible, who also lived before a great flood that reshaped the world. The fact that different civilizations had similar stories about a great flood and a king who lived before it suggests a shared memory of a real catastrophic event, passed down through generations and adapted into their own unique cultural tales. Then there is the heroic figure of King Memnon. In Greek mythology, he was the king of Ethiopia, a land often associated with Africa. He was described as a handsome and powerful warrior who came to fight for the Trojans in the Trojan War. He was considered an equal to the great Greek hero Achilles. The story of an African king fighting alongside Asian warriors against European ones is a powerful illustration of the mixed and connected world of that time. Memnon was not seen as a foreigner in a negative way, but as a noble ally and a formidable opponent. His legend shows that people from different continents could meet on the battlefield as respected equals, their stories woven together in the grand epic of the Trojan War. These kings, Midas, Noah or Nanicus and Memnon, are like threads in the rich fabric of ancient history. Their stories show us that the lines between myth and reality were often blurry. They also reveal a world where cultures were constantly mixing. A king from Turkey becomes a star in a Greek myth. A flood story is shared across the Middle East and beyond. An African hero becomes a central character in Europe's most famous war story. These legends are not just entertaining tales, they are historical clues. They tell us that people, ideas, and power moved freely across the ancient world, creating a shared heritage that connects us all, even to this day. Mountains have always held a special power over the human imagination. They are places of beauty and danger, reaching from the earth up to the heavens. In the ancient world, mountains were often seen as the homes of the gods, sacred places where mortals could come closer to the divine. The most famous of these is Mount Olympus, in Greece. This was believed to be the palace of the 12 Olympian gods, where Zeus sat on his mighty throne and ruled over the world. The Greeks looked up at its cloudy peaks with a sense of awe and reverence. For them, Olympus was not just a mountain. It was a real physical place where the world of gods and the world of humans met. But this belief in sacred mountains was not unique to the Greeks. Many cultures shared this view. In the story of Noah, his ark comes to rest on Mount Ararat after the Great Flood. This mountain, located in modern-day Turkey, became a symbol of survival and a new beginning for humanity. It was the place where life started again, a sacred peak that connected the old world with the new. The story of Mount Ararat, much like the story of Mount Olympus, shows how mountains were seen as central to the most important events in human and divine history. They were the stage upon which epic dramas of creation, destruction and rebirth were played out for all to see. The Greeks also had stories about great battles that took place on mountains. One of the most famous is the Gigantomachy, the war between the Olympian gods and the giants. The giants were monstrous, powerful beings who tried to overthrow the gods by piling mountains on top of each other to reach Olympus. This epic battle, which the gods eventually won, was a way for the Greeks to explain their own world. It represented the triumph of order over chaos, of civilization over wild nature. The mountains themselves became the battleground, symbolizing the immense power of both the gods and the primal forces of the earth that challenged them. These myths and stories reveal a deep psychological connection to the landscape. The story of Echo, a mountain nymph who could only repeat the words of others, gives a mythical explanation for the natural phenomenon of an echo in the mountains. It's a beautiful example of how ancient people used storytelling to make sense of their environment. For them, the world was alive with meaning. Mountains were not just piles of rock, they were the homes of gods, the battlegrounds of giants, and the dwelling places of spirits. This sacred view of nature shaped their culture, their religion, and their understanding of their own place in the cosmos. In the ancient world, there was often a big difference between the people who lived in the mountains and those who lived in the cities and flatlands. Mountain peoples, like the Achaeans and Macedonians in Greece, were often seen as tougher, simpler, and more warlike. They lived a hard life, surrounded by rugged terrain. This made them strong and independent. They were often herders and farmers living in small, scattered communities rather than large, organized cities. Their culture was shaped by the challenges of their environment. They were known for their bravery and their fierce fighting spirit, qualities that were necessary for survival in the harsh and often dangerous mountain landscapes. In contrast, the people who lived in the great cities like Athens or the coastal cities of Ionia in Turkey developed a very different kind of culture. They were merchants, artisans, and philosophers. Life in the city was more focused on trade, politics, and the arts. They built magnificent temples, theaters, and public squares where citizens could gather to discuss ideas. Their world was one of commerce and intellect, a sophisticated society that valued debate and creativity. While the mountain folk were seen as embodying strength and tradition, the city dwellers represented progress, innovation, and a more complex social order. There was often a tension, and sometimes conflict between these two ways of life. This difference is beautifully illustrated by the history of Greece itself. The early Greeks, the Achaeans of Homer's epics, were a warrior society from the mountainous north. They conquered the more sophisticated Minoan and Mycenaean city cultures. Later, the Macedonians, another group of tough mountain people led by Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, came down from their northern homeland to conquer all of Greece. They then went on to build one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. It seems that the raw energy and military discipline of the mountain folk were often able to overpower the more refined but perhaps less unified city cultures. This dynamic was not just about conflict, it was also about a mixing of strengths. When Alexander the Great and his Macedonian army conquered the Persian Empire, they brought Greek culture, its language, philosophy, and art with them. This created a new blended civilization known as the Hellenistic culture. It combined the strength and drive of the mountain conquerors with the ancient wisdom and sophistication of the city cultures of Greece, Egypt, and Persia. This shows that the relationship between mountain and city was not just one of opposition, it was a creative force that drove history forward, blending different strengths to create something new and powerful. Among the many fascinating spiritual traditions of the ancient world, one of the most curious is the role of priestesses known as bees, or melissae in Greek. This title was given to women who served the great goddesses of the earth and nature. Bees were seen as sacred creatures, symbols of purity, organization, and the life-giving power of nature. They fly from flower to flower, collecting nectar and creating honey, a substance that was seen as a divine food, a gift from the gods. The priestesses who took their name were believed to have a special connection to the divine, acting as messengers between the world of humans and the world of the gods. These sacred bee priestesses were found in many different cultures, which suggests another deep connection across the ancient world. In Greece, the priestesses of the goddess Demeter, who was the goddess of the harvest and agriculture, were called melissae. The famous Oracle of Delphi, the most important shrine in all of Greece, was also served by a priestess, and her prophetic powers were sometimes linked to the symbolism of bees. This tradition was not limited to Greece. We find similar ideas in the cultures of the Near East. The goddess Artemis at Ephesus in modern-day Turkey was often depicted with bee-like figures on her statue, showing her connection to this powerful natural symbol. The role of these priestesses was incredibly important. They were the guardians of ancient rituals and sacred knowledge. They presided over mysteries and ceremonies that were central to their community's spiritual life. The melissae were often associated with themes of death and rebirth, just as bees disappear during the winter and reappear in the spring. This connection to the cycles of nature made them powerful figures who could guide people through life's biggest transitions. They were respected and sometimes feared, as they held the keys to understanding the will of the goddesses they served. Their wisdom was sought by kings and commoners alike. The widespread presence of bee priestesses from Greece to Turkey and beyond points to a shared system of beliefs about nature and divinity. It suggests that these cultures, though different in many ways, saw the world through a similar spiritual lens. They recognized the feminine power in nature and created a special role for women to be its keepers. The story of the melissae is a beautiful reminder that ancient religion was not only about powerful male gods on mountaintops. It was also about the quiet, steady work of women who, like the bees they were named after, helped to keep their societies nourished, balanced, and connected to the sacred rhythms of the earth. The story of our ancient world is ultimately a story about movement. It is not just the movement of goods on ships or armies across land, but the movement of ideas, knowledge, and culture. For a very long time, this flow of knowledge moved primarily from the older civilizations of the East to the younger, emerging cultures of the West. Great centers of learning and innovation in Africa and Asia acted as fountains of wisdom, and their streams trickled outwards to nourish the rest of the world. Countries like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India were the ancient world's great teachers, and Europe was, for a long time, its eager student. Think about some of the most basic things we take for granted today. The alphabet we use has its distant roots in the scripts of the Near East passed on to the Greeks by the Phoenicians. The mathematics we learn in school, including geometry and astronomy, was developed to an incredible degree by the Egyptians and Babylonians. They used it to build their pyramids, map the stars, and predict the seasons. Philosophical and spiritual ideas from India, such as the concept of reincarnation, traveled along trade routes and influenced the thinking of Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato. This flow of knowledge was the foundation upon which Western civilization was built. This transfer of culture happened in many ways. It happened through trade, as merchants brought back not just spices and silks, but also new stories and ideas. It happened through conflict, as empires expanded and different cultures were forced to interact with one another. It also happened through deliberate study. Ambitious young men from Greece and other parts of Europe would travel to Egypt to study in its temples, which were like the great universities of their day. They went there to learn medicine, mathematics, and philosophy from priests who guarded knowledge that was thousands of years old. They returned home with wisdom that would transform their own societies. This understanding completely changes how we should view history. It shows us that Europe did not develop in isolation. Its golden age of philosophy, science, and art was not born from nothing. It was the result of centuries of learning from the older and more advanced civilizations of Africa and Asia. Recognizing this doesn't diminish the achievements of the Greeks or Romans. Instead, it places them in their proper context, as part of a much larger global story of human progress. It shows that all cultures have contributed to our shared pool of knowledge, and that the greatest advancements often happen when we are open to learning from others. As we have traveled across the ancient world from the mysterious stones of the Menehune to the sacred mountains of Greece, a clear picture has emerged. The story of humanity is not a collection of separate tales but one single epic narrative of connection. We have seen how the fall of a legendary continent like Atlantis could be linked to the rise of a real kingdom like Egypt. We have followed the trade routes that formed a great web across the seas, carrying not just goods but also ideas, beliefs, and stories between Africa, India, and Europe. This constant mixing and mingling is what has made us who we are today. The legends of great kings like Midas and Memnon, and the shared myths of a great flood, show us that our ancestors were all grappling with the same big questions about life, power, and survival. Their stories, whether based in fact or fiction, became a common language that helped them understand their world and each other. The mountains they saw as homes for their gods and the priestesses they revered as sacred bees reveal a shared sense of wonder and a deep connection to the natural world. These beliefs were not confined by borders. They flowed across cultures, creating a shared spiritual heritage that is both beautiful and profound. Understanding these connections is more important now than ever. In a world that can sometimes feel divided, looking back at our shared past reminds us that we have always been part of one human family. The achievements of one culture have always been built upon the foundations laid by others. The flow of knowledge from east to west enriched the world, proving that we are at our best when we are open, curious, and willing to learn from one another. The ancient stones, the faded myths, and the buried cities all tell us the same thing. We are more connected than we are different. So the next time you hear a myth or see a picture of an ancient ruin, I hope you will think of this incredible interconnected story. Think of the Hawaiian builders and the European dolmens, of the African king who fought at Troy, and of the Greek philosophers who studied in Egypt. These are not just dusty old tales, they are chapters in our own family history. They are clues to understanding our shared journey, a journey that began thousands of years ago and continues with us today. Our past is a rich and wonderful tapestry, woven with threads from every corner of the earth, and it belongs to all of us.